Hi, everybody. It's a great honor to be connected to you virtually all the way here from Los Angeles, California. And I am so jealous that I'm not actually there with you because it sounds like you have such an amazing day ahead of you with lots of great things to learn, and I wish I could be learning along with you. So after I'm done with my talk today, my goal is that you will have the access to resources to allow yourself to make almost anything. And the reason that I put the word almost in there is because I know that it's good to under-promise and over-deliver. So let's go ahead and advance the slide. And the story that I'm going to tell you is broken up into three parts. The first part takes place from around 1900 to 1970. And it starts with farmers. My talk, I'm looking at some statistics regarding American farmers, but I think that we can apply these to most developed countries. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. As you can see, in 1900, 80% of Americans worked on farms. And so what did that mean? Well, that meant that they were typically away from urban areas. They had to make, modify, and repair all of their own farming equipment. Most farms had workshops built in. Farmers were very innovative. They had to come up with solutions to problems with the materials they had at hand. They had to be very resourceful. There was a lot of ingenuity in farming. If you look at 2012, the latest statistics I could find, only 2% of people in the United States work on farms. That's a huge difference and kind of a big change in the culture and mindset. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of look at farmers and look at them through the lens of being makers and how they created things. And so I started looking at these farming implement catalogs. This one was several hundred pages long. It was a huge catalog with all sorts of incredible machines, devices, mechanisms, parts, components. You could literally rebuild civilization after the zombie apocalypse if you had one of these catalogs. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So these farmers, they had these maker skills as basically out of necessity. They made things because they had to do it for survival and for the survival of their families. But that didn't mean that when they were done working for the day, they stopped making things. They had these skills and they knew that making things was very rewarding. So there naturally became a market that took advantage of this, that farmers and people who were handy wanted to make things in their free time, on their own time. And one of those people who really did that was Hugo Gernsback. He's known as the father of science fiction because he came up with a magazine called Amazing Stories in 1926, a very popular science fiction magazine. But even before that, Gernsback created a large number of magazines that really appealed to these farmers as hobbyist makers. There was the Electrical Experimenter that was started in 1913, the Experimenter, Science and Invention, Radiocraft, Everyday Mechanics. These were all magazines that were really geared towards making things on your own time at home. This is a picture of Hugo Gernsback in a very colorful chair, and he's looking at the equivalent of a remote control widescreen television set of the day. You can see the cathode ray tube there. It's about the size of a teacup saucer. Next slide, please. So I started looking a little more deeply into the magazines that Hugo Gernsback produced. And I was really amazed at the articles that were in the Electrical Experimenter during the years 1917 to 1918. This is like 100 years ago. And some of the projects in these magazines, you could actually find very easily on the cover of Make magazine. These are things that people would be interested in today. Wireless transmission of power, free electricity from the wind, a radio-controlled model boat, electricity to prevent future fuel crisis, utilizing burnt-out lamp bulbs. That's amazing. What I'm learning from doing all this research is that making isn't something that just happened in the last 10 years or something. It's been going on for 100 years, making as kind of a rewarding activity that's beyond just necessity, beyond Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Next slide, please. So I started looking a little bit more at some of these magazines, and one of them that Ginsberg did is called Radio Craft Magazine. And this project you see on the cover is a parabolic microphone that you can build so that you can record bird sounds and other nature sounds and capture those sounds from a distance. And when I saw this project, I immediately remembered a project that we did in Make magazine. You can go to the next slide. This is a parabolic microphone that's made from parts that can be purchased at a dollar store. All of these are components that cost $1 or less. There's a small umbrella there. There's a paint roller, and there is a cell phone microphone and earbud headset to capture it. And it works really well to capture animal sounds. But here we have a magazine from the early 1930s, and then we have something from the 2000s. People are doing the same thing then as they are doing now. Next slide, please. So this is in 1949 when everyone was wearing radio hats. And when I saw it, I thought, you know, that is exactly the kind of thing that we had in Make magazine recently. Go ahead and show the next slide. I mean, look at that. People want to put funny electronics into helmets. It's just something that's crossed this boundary, or, you know, crossed this chasm of decades. People are still doing the same thing. Next slide, please. So as we moved out of World War II and people started moving into the suburbs, they had more room for their projects. They could have bigger workshops. They had suburbia to build go-karts and drive around and all sorts of outdoor projects. I particularly like this go-kart because it's an electric go-kart rather than one that used the lawnmower engine. And once again, this is very similar to a project we had in Make magazine. Show the next slide, please. You can see that the red wheels are a common symbol in these kinds of carts. And I like the way that the guy driving this go-kart is both more safe and less safe than the kid. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. This issue of Science and Mechanics offered complete plans for building a suitcase-sized power cycle. And I guess that's true, but take a look at the size of that suitcase. That's I guess they had to make one that big so that they could have that compelling cover line there. So once again, Make magazine did it 60 years later. Go ahead and show the next slide. This is, it looks silly, and it is pretty silly when you're writing it. You'll see that it's actually powered by a battery-powered drill in the back there. It's a 36-volt drill. And this thing has incredible low-end torque. When I sat on it, it just scooted right out from under me, and I fell right on my butt. So as soon as that happened, I knew that we had to put it in the magazine. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Teaching her wireless. It really doesn't seem like he's that interested in teaching her Morse code. But go ahead and go to the next slide. You can see that almost 100 years later, making things really is a couple's activity. I see lots of boyfriends, girlfriends, couples of all kinds, children, parents, grandparents, groups of people, because making is a social activity. It really should be called do it together instead of do it yourself, because it's much more fun and much more rewarding, and you can learn so much more when you work with other people, either virtually or online. So I've been showing you these old projects from 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, but one of the reasons why we consider making to be a new thing is because from about 1970 to 2000, we kind of had a dark ages in making. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here we see two issues of the same magazine, Popular Mechanics, one from 1973 and one from the year 2000. And if you take a close look at the cover lines of the magazine and what is being offered to the readers, you'll see that the 1973 issue of Popular Mechanics was all about making things, modifying things, and repairing things. How to make vacation homes, how to wire a yard light, how to silence squeaky floors, how to hang shelves, how to repair a damaged roof, all about making things. There's a car care guide up there. So take a look now at the year 2000 and what is Popular Mechanics about now? World's tallest building. Nobody's going to be able to build the world's tallest building in their backyard. Fastest PC you can buy. They're talking about buying a PC instead of making your computer. Brain implants. You're not going to be doing brain implants at home. So, you know, why did this happen? That was the question I asked myself. Why did we have this decline in making things? And I think I have an answer. Go ahead and go to the next slide. In 1954, a 15-inch color television set cost $1,175 US. If you adjust that for inflation, that is $9,700 in US dollars, adjusted for inflation. So that's like an incredible amount of money, very expensive. What happens if you have a TV like this and it stops working? Go ahead and go to the next slide. What you would do is you would remove the back panel of the television set, and you would find these tubes that you could just pull out of the back of the TV. They were user-friendly parts. And you would take those tubes down to the local store. We had these in drugstores when I was a kid. And my dad would take the tubes and he would stick them in the sockets. You could see in the upper right-hand corner, there's one of the tubes in the sockets there. And you could see if the tube was good or bad. And if it was bad, then you could just open up the little cabinet underneath the testing station and pull out the tube that you needed, go back home, plug it in your TV, and fix it. And so then I also found in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that a guy wrote in a tip to the 1962 issue of Popular Science magazine showing how to transport a broken television tube or a tube that needed repair when it was in your car. His idea was to put a seat belt around the tube. So now you know why they had seat belts in cars in the 60s. So let's move to the present day. A television set, 19-inch color television set, much larger than the 15-inch one, costs $140 in today's money. Adjusted backwards for inflation, that would be $17 in 1954 dollars. Go ahead to the next slide. What this means is that the 1954 customer paid 70 times as much for a smaller color TV. They had a huge investment in that color TV that they bought. We don't have a big investment in the color TVs we buy. What happens when our TVs break now? Go ahead to the next slide. This is what happens to it. We don't fix it. For one thing, it would cost more money to take it to a place to get it fixed than it would be to buy a new TV set. Second, if you wanted to try to fix it yourself, you'd have a really hard time doing it. A lot of the enclosures are glued together rather than screws. There's no panel, there's no user serviceable parts inside. The components are all surface mounted, they're tiny little components. You can't get replacement parts easily, so you really don't have much of a choice to throw it away. So let's go to the next slide. This is just one more example of the most popular kind of DIY magazine from past decades, Popular Science. The 1970 issue had this really cool, charming, funky car called the Box with plans on how to make it. And again, you take a look at the projects in Popular Science from 1970. There's a personal meditation electronic device, how to make it. A special section on home entertainment, how to set up your place for home entertainment. All sorts of things about making things for your house and your family. And then we moved to Popular Science of the year 2000. And you see the world's fastest computer chips, revolution under the hood. This car is something that you wouldn't be able to work on. As Matthew Crawford said in his book, Shop Class as Soulcraft, if you lift the hood on a modern car, what you find underneath is another hood. It's hidden from you. You don't have access to it. You can't make it anymore. So because people no longer needed to make, modify, or repair their stuff anymore, they kind of lost the skill to make things. And we saw a decline of do-it-yourself in mainstream culture. The next slide, please. Luckily, at the same time, we were seeing a rise of a do-it-yourself subculture. On the fringes and the margins, people were kind of rediscovering or keeping the candle lit in the world of DIY. One of those was the hippie movement. Stuart Brand's Whole Earth Catalog was kind of like a guidebook for hippies who wanted to move out of cities and start their own self-sufficient communes and figure out how to farm, how to build shelters, the kinds of tools that they needed to do that, how to make their own clothes. There were even reviews about computer technology and other kinds of communication technology. And also the punk subculture was really big with DIY. These were folks who did not want to deal with the recording industry and play by their own rules, so they decided to short-circuit the whole music industry and create their own albums, book their own tours, make their own rock posters, and we saw a really cool, rich DIY subculture come out of that. And so go ahead and go to the next slide. The thing that got me really excited about the do-it-yourself world took place in the late 80s when I got an issue of the Whole Earth Review called the Signal issue. That was the theme of it. And it was really the prototype for Wired magazine, which came out 6 years later in 1993. The editor of the Whole Earth Review, who edited the Signal issue, became one of the founding editors of Wired. But this happened 6 years earlier. And if you look at it, it really is like a blueprint for Wired magazine. It was all about electronic media and how to empower individuals so that they could communicate with other people around the world and do it in a creative, expressive way. When I got a hold of this copy of the Whole Earth Review, it changed my life completely. One of the things that I found in it was a review of this magazine on the right called Fact Sheet 5, which was kind of like the Yahoo of the zine world. Zines were self-published, small print publications where people could make their own personal magazines based on their obsessive interests. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's some of the zines that I had collected. These are from my personal collection of zines. You can see that they have a lot of personality. They're kind of funky, a little rough around the edges. They focus on narrow topics. They're people who are passionate and obsessive. And that was kind of how I got my start in the world of DIY, because I started a print zine called Boing Boing with my wife in 1988. And we would send copies to other zine makers that we met in the pages of Fact Sheet 5. And really, the whole DIY zine world is what led me to the making world and making physical things. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So now we will take a look at this modern third era that I call the modern maker movement. That is kind of different from, and I can break this down into two phases. The first phase, I think, lasted from about 2000 to 2008. It started when people started sharing their plans for making things online with each other. And it was like, look at this cool thing that I made, and here's how I made it. You can make it too. But then somewhere around 2008, makers got more sophisticated, and they started making cool things for other makers. And what I mean by that is that they created not only cool things that other people could make, but they created tools and systems and techniques and organizations to help other people make really cool things, no matter what their level of expertise was, or how large their organization was that they belonged to. What they've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years is empowering individuals to be able to make almost anything. And we'll go into that in more detail as I continue with this presentation. You can go to the next slide. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Make Magazine, because I think this is part of the movement. I'm the founding editor-in-chief of Make Magazine. We've been around since 2005. We call our readership broad spectrum enthusiasts, people who are really interested in a lot of things. And we kind of differentiate a broad spectrum enthusiast from a hobbyist who is more or less interested in just one thing and getting really good at it. Broad spectrum enthusiast is someone who is curious about everything and wants to have a say in everything around them. And they want to participate in the design world around them and be able to come up with solutions for their problems by being an active participant in it, rather than a consumer of a solution, just buying a solution off the shelf. We have an annual Maker Fair in San Mateo, California that has 120,000 attendees, and we have mini Maker Fairs all around the world. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is just a few covers from Make Magazine to show you the wide range of projects that we have in there. We had one about how to make a really cool automated haunted house, welding articles, how to make really cool spud gun potato cannons, car hack tips, making your own musical instruments, how to do really cool coffee hacks, how to do fun things, fun ways to make coffee. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We even had a DIY biology issue that showed you how to do cross hybridization of plants. We had an issue that was all about toys and games and how to restore pinball machines. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We did one on fringe science, letting people explore science that's questionable in whether it really works or not, but letting people set up experiments to see if they could, for instance, control random outcomes or take Kirlian photography. I love this photo of this quarter here. That's something called Kirlian photography, where you apply high voltage to something and it emits kind of an aura. I used to see this in a magazine called Fate magazine here in the United States when I was a kid, and I always wanted to know how they did it, and so we figured out how to do it. And simple robotics projects. Let's go to the next slide and kind of dig in, drill down a little bit. I'll show you some of the projects that are in the magazine, some of my favorite ones. So Larry Cotton is a frequent contributor to the magazine, and one of the things that he likes to do is take photographs of songbirds that are outside in his front yard. And so he set up a bird feeder, and he would take cameras of the birds when they landed on the bird feeder. But as luck would have it, the birds usually were behind the bird feeder, so he couldn't get a clear shot of the birds. They were always hiding. So then when he would go outside to take a photo of the birds would see him and get scared and fly away. And so he's like, what can I do about this? Well, there weren't any off-the-shelf solutions. There was nothing he could buy to solve this problem. So he thought about it for a while, and he realized that he could take a motor, the kind of called a servo motor. These are the kind of motors that are used in model airplanes to lift the elevator flaps up and down. And so he said, I'll put a servo motor on the bird feeder at the top, and then use my remote controller and I can slowly rotate the bird feeder so that I can rotate the bird until it's in my field of view, and I can take a picture. And so he can just he just uses the joystick and rotates this bird feeder, and the bird doesn't seem to mind because it just goes slowly enough that it doesn't scare it. Well, most of these remote controls have more than one controller on them. They have another radio channel with another joystick. So he said, you know, I can improve on this even more. I'll take another servo motor and mount it on my camera above the shutter button, and then I'll put my camera on a tripod in my yard, really close to the bird feeder, so that I can just sit in my front window and take a picture of the bird really close up. And so he's just inside his house with his, looking through the window, controlling this remote control, taking great pictures of birds. Go ahead and go to the next photo. You can see how there's Larry in the window there, and there's the bird being spun around, and you can see some of the bird photos that he's taken. They're really great photos, especially when you blow them up large so you can see them closely. Let's go to the next slide. This is Mr. Jalapi's world's largest iPod. Mr. Jalapi is a friend of mine who lives in Los Angeles. And one thing he does is he goes around to what we call in the United States here garage sales. I don't know if you call them rummage sales or yard sales or something. It's where people sell the stuff they don't want anymore. They put it on their lawn and sell it inexpensively. And so one of the things he likes to do is buy old vinyl records. And then he takes the records home and he plays them. And he thought, you know, I wish there were a way I could capture all these songs that I buy on LP so that I could listen to them on my iPod. So what he did was he took this old stereo hi-fi cabinet and he put a Mac Mini inside there and then a computer display and mounted it to the top lid and then wired an iPod up to it and hooked up all the buttons on the hi-fi cabinet so he could operate it all. So then he puts the LPs onto the player, and then when he plays an LP, it's digitizing the songs into MP3 files and then automatically looking up what the song's titles are and the artist and everything. So now he has a complete catalog of all the songs. So when he comes home from his garage sales with a dozen LPs, he just plays them while he putters around in his workshop. And then by the end of the day, they're all digitized. And now he has a huge library of songs on his on this kind of modified stereo cabinet, and then they go to his iPod. That's why he calls it the world's largest iPod. Next slide, please. So you're probably familiar with potato cannons, where you can launch a potato out of a long piece of plexiglass, or a long piece of PVC pipe. Well, we decided to do one better and use a clear piece of pipe so that you could see the explosion as it flies out. And it's really quite a sight when you use this thing at nighttime. Go ahead and go to the next slide. When we put a project in Make Magazine and show you how to do it, we show you everything that you need to put the thing together. So in the case of this Nightlighter 36, you can see that we have clear PVC pipe, a potato. We have a stun gun, which we use to ignite the spark that ignites the propellant. And then the propellant, or the fuel, is a can of antiperspirant that you spray into the tube. It's very flammable. Think about that the next time you use antiperspirant near an open flame. So let's go to the next slide. This is a water rocket. You might remember the toy water rockets. They're like these red and white water rockets, and you fill water in them, and then you pump them up, and they shoot up about 30 feet in the air. This one actually goes 300 feet in the air, and it's made from plastic carbonated beverage bottles. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is kind of a little diagram of how it works. I won't describe it in detail because I thought it'd be fun. Go ahead and play. The next slide is a little video that you can watch of the rocket.
Okay, guys, that looks good.
That's a little.
We want 100 pounds, none of that wimpy little 60 stuff.
How much do you think this thing will hold?
Is it strictly more it propels?
I mean, it's a The bottle is rated at 100, I think. Insert the retaining pin. Get the clip on. So we're gonna go for 70 pounds.
Zooming in.
Get out of there, get out of there. Perfect.
Rockets are always really popular in our magazine. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This one's one of my favorite projects we've ever done. So if you're like me, you hate waking up to the sound of an alarm. It's just jarring and annoying. And this guy feels the same way I do about alarms. So he created what he calls the bacon alarm. And what you do is you put bacon into this little pan under there and then put it into this pig-shaped clock. And at the appointed hour when you're supposed to wake up, the bacon starts to cook and you wake up to the delicious aroma of bacon. This guy needs some kind of medal, I think. The Nobel Prize is not good enough. They need to invent something better. I'll go ahead and go. Okay, so this next slide here, this is somebody wanted to challenge himself by making a chair using an entire sheet of 24-inch by 36-inch plywood. So it's about, I think that's like a meter, 3/4 of a meter by a meter in dimensions of the plywood. And you can see he used almost all the plywood in that sheet, just a couple of little tiny triangle wedge-shaped pieces he didn't use. That's one thing that makers like to do is once they become comfortable with like getting good at a skill, they raise the bar and challenge themselves to do something else. That's really the fun thing about making is you can start at any skill level and challenge yourself just enough to keep things interesting, but not so much that your failure rate is going to be 100%. You want to make it so that it's challenging, that you learn something, you learn how to use a new tool, and you just keep on increasing as you go along. Next slide, please. So this is where it gets really cool and so exciting to me is what makers are doing in recent years. And I think the best way to describe it is the end of organizational advantage. Think about a giant consumer electronics company like Sony and what is required of them to make a sophisticated piece of consumer technology. They have a research and development team, they have design engineers, they have to source materials and find out the best kind of materials to put in the product. They need to build prototypes. They need to get funding if they can't do it internally. They need to set up manufacturing, and they need to have a sales and distribution arm to do that. Well, the amazing thing is that in recent years, makers, do-it-yourselfers, have created low-cost, do-it-yourself versions of all of these things. Some of them are free, some are cost money but are very inexpensive. But importantly, they are all very powerful, and they can be used by individuals or small groups of people. So if you want to make something, you can find DIY ways to do all of this stuff here, and it's like really exciting, and we're already seeing really cool things because of it. Next slide. Let's talk about research and development. That used to be a very expensive part of making something. Large companies would pay a lot of money to conduct research and find out what is out there in the market already, who's the best at what they're doing and stuff. Now you go onto Google Images like I did, and I typed in remote control lawnmower, and these were some of the first images I found on Google Images, people who built their own remote control lawnmowers. So just think, 10 years ago, if you wanted to build your own remote control lawnmower, it would be really difficult to find about other people who were doing the same thing. Now, not only can you see pictures of it, but these people, more likely than not, have posted their plans on how they made these things, and they will be more than happy to talk to you about how they did it. Makers are usually very generous about that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. This one I'll just go over briefly, but I'll just say that about 10 years ago, people started congregating online and talking about how to improve their espresso machines. And so if you see that red line there, that is how an espresso machine, a typical espresso machine's water temperature looks. There's like a 50 degrees Fahrenheit temperature swing there. And forgive me for not knowing what the Celsius version is of that, but it's a lot. And you cannot get good espresso when you have that much temperature variation in your water boiler of your machine. And all the espresso machines in the world basically worked this way. They had a hard time controlling the temperature. Even the expensive professional espresso machines, the companies that have been making espresso machines for 100 years, never did anything about it. But then a bunch of coffee geeks got online and tried to figure it out. And then you see that blue line. That's what they came up with. They used something called a proportional integral derivative temperature control system. And that blue line, the temperature varies just 0.1 degree Fahrenheit. When you see that line, that blue line drop there, that's just when they are pulling a shot of espresso. And that just happens when the water comes out. But you see it quickly goes right back up to that tightly controlled temperature. Next slide, please. So people started, these DIYers started making kits and plans for people to modify their espresso machines so that they could control the temperature. I bought a kit and I changed my espresso machine. I modified it so that it works that way, and it's really great. I make great espresso now thanks to this temperature control system. And so after a few years, the professional espresso companies stood up and took notice and started adding the same kind of temperature control system in their espresso machines. And so not only is this kind of distributed R&D team that the internet has become available to makers, it's also big companies are waking up and taking notice of it too, and following the lead of the makers. The maker, which is really exciting. Next slide. Another great thing is another great R&D place besides the internet itself is meeting up with other people in maker spaces. Something magic happens when people meet up together in physical places and collaborate. You get cross-pollination when people who are good at different skills get together and combine their talents. You might have someone who's really good at electronics. You might have someone who's good at computer programming. Another person is good at designing enclosures. They get together and they can make amazing things. I'll show you a couple of examples of those later on. Let's go to the next slide. Computer-aided design software has really become powerful and inexpensive. When I was a mechanical engineer in the mid-1980s, computer-aided design software cost $50,000 for the license for a company to use, and then we were billed some ridiculous amount of money. I think it was like $50 or $75 an hour to use the software. A guy would come by every month from the company that supplied the software and use a special meter that he plugged into the back of our workstations to track how many hours we'd been using the software and then bill the company for it. Now if you go online, you can download a program like Google SketchUp for $0, and it is literally 10,000 times more powerful than the software that my company, the company I worked for in the 80s paid $50,000 for. People are making amazing stuff with CAD software that costs nothing. That's another huge change in the way that things are being made. Let's go to the next slide. Another thing is sourcing of materials and finding good materials and components for your projects. When I was an engineer, we had a library in our company. I worked for Memorex and Fujitsu were the companies I worked for, and we had libraries where we would have catalogs and we would try to find the components that we needed. It was really hard to find the components that we needed, but now the internet itself has become like an indexed surplus store or parts store. I went on to eBay. I was looking for photoresistors, and I found a place in Hong Kong that will sell 20 photoresistors for $2, including shipping. I have no idea how they'd make money sending a box all the way from Hong Kong to Los Angeles for $2. But somehow they do it, and they work just fine. Next slide. So how many of you have heard of Arduino? I see a few hands raised there. So the Arduino is a $25 printed circuit board that allows you to basically design electronic circuits without having a degree in mechanical engineering. You can do really sophisticated things with it. It's like the size of a credit card or smaller. The Arduino in this case is kind of one that's been kludged together because it's open source and you can just make your own, but you can buy them off the shelf very inexpensively. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is, let's see. Did I go, advance one more slide. I wonder if we're out of sync a little bit. Okay, I'll just briefly mention this one. I found a site that actually sells uranium, just showing you that everything is available online. The good news is if you want regular strength uranium, it's still available, but if you want high strength or super high strength, it's sold out. Go ahead and go to the next slide. 3D printing has really taken hold, and there are now retail stores all over the world where people sell 3D printers. And I don't really need to talk about 3D printers and tell you what they are now because they're household words. Go to the next slide. One cool thing you can do with 3D printers is print 3D printers out of them, like someone did here with the MakerBot. Next slide. This is an example of a way that you can do prototyping and design very inexpensively. Think of if you were a toy designer and you wanted to build a prototype toy. It would cost a lot of money. This is something that my friend put together using Shapeways and modeled a little character very easily using software. And go to the next slide. And you can see that Shapeways builds a little store for you. It's like a custom store that lets you buy the thing that you created. And that's like a computer-rendered photo or a computer-generated image of what it looks like. Next slide. And that's what it looks like when you print it out. Imagine if you wanted to build, design a toy or other object 10 years ago, how much longer it would have taken and how much more expensive it would have been to get a prototype made like that to your specifications. Next slide, please. Okay, this was the Arduino that I had spoken about before, the electronics prototyping platform. You can go to the next slide. Somebody used an Arduino to make a reverse geocache box. It's an Arduino, a GPS, and a latch, and it only opens in one spot on the planet. And so you have 20 tries, like you can press that button and it will tell you how many kilometers you are away from a special spot on the planet. That's all the information it gives you. And if you don't get it within 20 times, the box remains forever locked. And so you can put like presents or prizes inside the box. Kind of a game for people to play. And if this was something that you wanted to make like 10 or 15 years ago, it would cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to make and prototype it. But he was able to do it for probably under $100 in components. And he's not a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer. This stuff is really easy to use. Now, the most important thing is that you have a good imagination. Go to the next slide, please. So this is just an example of some of the ways that people are miniaturizing components so that these are like Arduino compatible components that you can make smaller and smaller, and they're getting more and more inexpensive. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm kind of moving quickly because we're running out of time. The Raspberry Pi is a really inexpensive full computer. It's again the size of a credit card, and it costs about $45. And so just another example of how things are getting miniaturized and less expensive and more powerful and more maker-friendly. I'm going to ask you to advance through slides quickly because we're running out of time and I just want to kind of get to the end. You can go ahead and skip this one. Skip. Skip. Skip it. Skip that one. Skip that one. And that one. Skip that one. This is a 12-year-old boy who started an Arduino peripherals company. These are all add-ons to Arduino devices. And I had been emailing him back and forth about the work he was doing, saying, it's really cool that you're doing this. I'm glad young people are involved. I thought he was a college student. And then I met him at a convention somewhere, and it was like this 12-year-old kid, and I was like looking around for his brother. But no, Quinn's the guy who made it. And I guess you could tell that it was a 12-year-old who did it, because the item on the right, in the lower right, is a fart detector. Okay, you can do the next slide. This is just an example of the level of sophistication that you see in maker-made projects now. People who are using those organizational disrupting technologies to make things that look like something that Sony would make. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a device that lets you measure the nerve signals coming out of cockroaches. That's a cockroach leg there. Next slide. The same company made a remote control cockroach, and this is a real cockroach with a circuit board on it, and you attach electrodes to its antenna, and you can use a remote control radio to actually steer the cockroach to go in whatever direction you want it to go in. I had one of these sent to me as a kit, but my kids wouldn't let me use it. So we ended up with having 2 Madagascar cockroaches as pets. Next slide, please. This is a device that someone came up with for about $100 of parts. His name's Steve Hofer, and it helps blind people navigate through rooms, because whenever these ultrasonic sensors sense an obstacle, the device starts to vibrate on the hand. Next slide. He also made a secret knock gumball machine that dispenses gum only if you knock the correct pattern into it. Next slide. Go ahead and skip this one, and the one after you can. Okay, so this was one I wanted to focus on a little bit. A hackerspace in Tokyo and a hackerspace in Los Angeles were not happy with the data that the Japanese government was issuing about radiation levels around Fukushima. So they decided to come up with a solution themselves, and they made several hundred of these devices. They are Geiger counters that have Wi-Fi radios and GPS radios in them, and they have people put these in their cars and then just drive around normally all over Japan, and it's taking radiation readings constantly and then transmitting the location and the radiation level to a central computer. So you can go to the next slide. And they've been mapping the radiation levels in Japan. So they've been able to do this very inexpensively by making this thing. Imagine how expensive it would have been if the Japanese government decided to embark on a program like this. It would have been millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. Meanwhile, these guys did it for maybe $10,000 to do a project like this that scientists all over the world are using. And you can use this device not only to measure radiation, but you put a different kind of sensor, you can monitor anything that can be measured in the environment. Next slide. So I wanted to conclude by, I've been showing you all this really cool, like high-tech technology that people have been using, but this guy really captures the spirit of making. I was at a maker fair a while ago, and I met Scott Weaver, and these are the only ingredients that Scott Weaver uses to make his creations. You see some toothpicks there, you can see some glue, you can see some single-edged razor blades. So it's basically knife, glue, and toothpicks. That's all he has, and you will see in the next slide what he makes with this. This is a map of San Francisco, and it's got like little marbles that roll down tracks, and it's like a beautiful thing. And so when I saw this, I was like, Scott, this is the coolest thing in the world. I really want to take your picture so that I can post it on Make's weblog. And he said, okay, let me put on my costume first. And you can see what it looks like in the next slide. That's Scott. And like Scott, more than anything that anyone I've ever met, like embodies what making is all about. It's like something that you are passionate about, that you want to do something that you can't buy, that belongs to you, that has a story that's very personal, and that brings you and other people delight. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really enjoyed that. And I love the whole idea of being able to make stuff and disrupt organisations. I just think that whole thing is fantastic. But the other thing I love is the joy that makers get in collaborating together. And I think that's one thing that libraries are really about, is being spaces where people come together and collaborate. And we just have to take that into the maker space so that people can come and make stuff. In our spaces.
Absolutely. Libraries are just the natural place for this kind of human interaction to happen. They're physical spaces where people can meet and share ideas. And like I said, that's where magic really happens.
So I'm all for libraries being the next magical spaces. So thank Mark again for us.